Welcome to CWJah Talk number 46, The Great Tribulation. It's a reference that's made only a couple of times in the Bible, most notably, for most people probably, in Revelation chapter 7. But there's also another reference in Matthew chapter 4 that is probably, if not equally as well known, close to it. We're going to consider them both. And then we're going to consider other texts that are similar to these two texts in terms of what they're talking about, so that we can try to figure out what is the Great Tribulation, right? Is this something, is this an event that is still future and that as Christians we should be preparing for because we don't know when it will happen? Is it an event that's still future that we do know when will happen? Is it an event that's been going on for some time and that will continue to go on until the end? Well, I'm not going to answer those questions right now, but I believe the texts, the biblical texts that we're going to read right now, will answer them. So let's go to it. Sandy, good to see you. Okay. So what I've done is I've grouped together a bunch of texts that we're going to read instead of, jumping around in a text like NWT. I've gone ahead and brought them together. That'll make it easy for us. Plus I can make a little bit bigger text and we can read together. This is from the NWT. I'm a Christian witness of Jah, of course, a Jehovah's Witness. That doesn't mean I support the Watchtower Society. I agree with them in terms of when they teach what is true, just like I agree with other groups that teach what is true. I agree with the truth that is taught through the person who is the truth, Jesus, and that is true based on verifiable information that we can pull from history, from archaeology, from grammar, from science, right? So these types of truths. We don't just give people labels like the truth, especially when they don't really deserve them, right? Just because a group like the Watchtower teaches some truths doesn't mean they're the truth. We've already talked about before how really the only one who's appropriately called that is Jesus. I understand Watchtower, Jehovah's Witnesses, you may disagree, and that's fine. But I'm just making it clear here because we will get into some issues, right, that obviously relate to a lot of your beliefs. We understand as either current or former Jehovah's Witnesses associated with the Watchtower, right? I think, being a Jehovah's Witness has really nothing to do with the Watchtower other than the name, right? We grant that. They have made use of that name in such an identifiable way that you have to explain yourself a little bit, right? Or take another name, but also agree that you are that in name in terms of what the name represents, right? What it means to be a Jehovah's Witness. Bear witness to Jehovah, right? It's like, that's the actual words, Jehovah's Witness. So who else are you bearing witness to make you a Jehovah's Witness? It's Jehovah, right? That's it. You're never supposed to be bearing witness to humans unless it's to Jesus. I understand you have a different view and that the governing body, in some sense, to you is elevated on that level, but that's where we disagree. So you can have your view, and people like me will have my view, and just reserve that level for God and his Son. And all humans should be considered sinners, liars, and people who are just trying to get through this life to do the best we can. It doesn't mean we're all bad and horrible people, right? I mean, some of us are actually trying, like Joseph, right? We may still fail. That doesn't mean Joseph didn't fail. But when it came to Potiphar's wife, he showed he could succeed in life. So there are those of us who have failed, who will fail. But we're not going to let those failures keep us from succeeding in life. We're not going to embrace the failure. We're not going to embrace the sin. And we're not going to follow humans who tell us to trust them 100%. No. And neither should you. But if you choose to do so, you get to do that. Everyone gets to choose. We respect that. At least I respect your right to do so. I understand. There are certain things, right, as Jehovah's Witnesses or former Jehovah's Witnesses, when you look at the group, right, a lot of it is based on this idea of end time events, right? That we could be so close that the Great Tribulation is next, right? It's like right here. And that has a lot to do with a lot of their history, at least in most of, if not all of the 20th century, because when you consider some of the primary doctrines of the Watchtower Society, a lot of them have a lot of foundation, right? We when we became Jehovah's Witnesses, or if we're still Jehovah's Witnesses, we know texts that talk about God taking out a people for his name, right? That's a text that can make a lot of people reflect and think, there's not a lot of people out there using Jehovah's name and putting it in the Bible where it belongs and all this stuff, right? And that is true. There aren't a lot of people doing that. But there are also not a lot of groups out there telling people that the generation that saw the events of 1914 is not going to pass away and that it's God's promise. You see, so you can't just have things that make you look like God's people when you have other things that don't make you look like God's people. Because what happens is when you only look at the things that make you think you're God's people, and the other people who are looking at these things you're not looking at, this is where the real disconnect and sometimes I think disdain or division really persists. Is this refusal of us to accept our mistakes, to accept our sins. And the Watchtower Society has a problem with that, right? They for a long time have really used this great tribulation, this idea of the end being so close that the majority of their membership is of the great crowd that will go into the new earth through the great tribulation, right? Where that's been basically taught for almost 100 years in terms of the group separation, right? When Rutherford looked out over the group of early Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1930s, I believe, 1930 to 35, at a convention, he said, "Behold, the great crowd." And then they started to develop this division among themselves of people who believed they were members of the great crowd that would go into the new earth versus those who were members of the new covenant with Christ and were partaking of the emblems and would live in heaven. So that's been going on for almost 100 years. This idea that you are so close. You're the great crowd. You are. You've been the great crowd for decades. And it makes people think there's something, and that and that the something they think they are is connected to an event so close, right? That you're almost through Armageddon in your mind. You're that close because you're the great crowd. And the great crowd comes out of the great tribulation, as you're going to see in a moment. So this idea, that there is a lot of good in the Watchtower Society. There's a lot of this discussion of the Great Tribulation, the end times, the chronology of 1914, 1919, right? All of this is connected in some way. This isn't going to be about the Watchtower, but there's a big part of Watchtower that is involved in this discussion. And quite honestly, I don't even like this. I mean, I like the discussion. It's biblical, it's important. But as I said earlier, the things that we have to deal with, right? We have tribulation all the time. We may never see the Great Tribulation unless it's something that's already been going on and is continuing through to the end. But if it's a future event, there are other types of tribulation, right? Things that we need to be worried about on a daily basis. And yes, this is a big one. Whether it's been going on or is a future event, the way it's presented, it's a big one. But our anxiety should never be so great that it makes us unable to plan and prepare and to think rationally. We're not supposed to be getting excited, as we will also see in a moment. I was going to say again in a moment because we've talked about it so many times, right? 2 Thessalonians 2. And we're not supposed to be doing that. So this discussion is not meant to do that either. I'm not reading these texts and giving you my opinion because I want you to get so heightened in your awareness. I think you should already be as aware as you need to be. Prepare every day, right? You're not perfect. You make mistakes. Have faith. Rely on God. Trust in the Christ. Lock your doors, right? Do the things spiritually and physically you need to do to prepare every day. Do you set your house alarm every day? Do you lock your home every day? Do you lock your car every day? These are things you're doing every day physically. Spiritually, you should be doing the same thing. So then it won't matter, right? Whatever happens, whether it's a minor tribulation or the great tribulation. If you're doing things routinely and you are habitually preparing, you don't need to worry. You're already in a state where you're, yeah, I don't want it to happen, but I'm ready, and you do what you got to do. So there's no real reason to get overly excited. That's not the way we're going to build faith. It's the way people lose their faith when they start to get too excited about things and speculate or predict. That never brings people back closer together or make them better. And it never glorifies God or the Christ. Never, right? It just brings attention to those people and they fail. And then it's like, whether it's Watchtower or other people, it's never a good thing. And a lot of us, I think, wish Watchtower would never have done these types of things, right? They should have quit a long time ago. In my opinion, maybe 1970, I would never have gotten into this speculation about end times and tribulation and all this stuff. But, I would have thought after 1975, you never, ever, ever hint at the end coming again. You just say it'll come when it comes. The thief, we're ready every day, right? You stop talking about it. They can't. They kept going with the generation. They pushed that to the max. And that's what kept everyone around, right? Because it was like, well, this could be true. It's like we're still within that reasonable period of what could be a generation, and it's like 1914 generation. It could be right. It was like, but that's so terrible. You're not supposed to be doing that. It's explicit in the Bible. Do not get excited. You do not know the day and the hour. I mean, you would have to have a lot of belief, right? And I believe they did, right? When I'm being critical in some way about the Watchtower right now, I'm not saying I don't think they had some reasons for believing some of the things they did. I just don't believe they should have done what they did. They shouldn't have presented it the way they did. You want to believe it? You think you've got this figured out? Great. Keep it to yourself. Maybe a few of you want to talk about it. To get everybody all excited and panicked and then fail multiple times? You got to stop talking about it, right? You got to shut down, right? You've lost credibility on this subject. So, and it doesn't do me any good, right? It makes my job harder, more difficult, because I've got to teach the truth about the divine name, no Trinity. People immediately associate me with Watchtower in some sense, and because I've done a lot with it. And as far as those subjects go, that's fine. But the other stuff, right, everything else, right, that's not something I'm here to deal with. That's not my problem. And I did try to help. I have put down what I think is a fair assessment in many ways that helps many people in the Watchtower, and that helped Watchtower, and that didn't do me a whole lot of good. And I'm okay with that because I did what I thought was right. No, I didn't think about, whether or not it would cost me, down the line with a bunch of Trinitarians and stuff, right? Maybe in different work positions or relationships. Either way, we have to do what we have to do, and we either do it for the right reasons or we don't. So I don't want to get into Watchtower's motives or anything, but when it comes to the Great Tribulation, this whole subject, it can get a little difficult for me and for other people because of the association with Watchtower, my sensitivity to falling in the same path in any way, right? So nothing I'm going to be talking about should be taken as, if you don't agree with me, I think you're a bad person, or I think you're not a Christian. I'm just giving you my opinion, my interpretation based on the text that we're going to read next. And once we start reading, we're going to go all the way to the end. I've got good stuff. I'm going to let the text speak. We're going to talk about it. I think the text will speak. So, but you can disagree, right? I don't want to have this ongoing argument or disagreement with you. If you think something I say is this, you don't agree with it, and you keep, if you want to make a point, make a point. You want to ask a question. I don't want to have a long, drawn out discussion over these types of subjects. You can comment, that's okay, but let's try not to let discussion of this subject, in this case, become a cause for stumbling or division. You can disagree, so there'll be a little division of ideas in that way, but there's a way we can present ideas and beliefs about these texts and be more inclusive than condemning, right? You don't have to like what other people think. You can disagree and think someone's just wrong. But let's not try to make that the theme, right? Let's see where we can get along. Here we go. We'll start in Matthew 13:20, and we'll read 2 verses, 20 and 21. As for the one sown upon the rocky places, this is the one hearing the word and at once accepting it with joy. So you're like, how does this have anything to do with the tribulation, huh? Verse 21, yet he has no root in himself, but continues for a time. And after tribulation or persecution has arisen on account of the word, he is at once stumbled. So you see, it really has everything to do with the Great Tribulation, doesn't it? Because depending on how the seed has been sown in you, when this happens, we're going to find out what's going on. Right? So tribulation or persecution is very revealing. You may wonder, well, why are they putting us through this tribulation? Right? Why do I have to go through this at all? Huh? That's why. Because they're going to find out what kind of plant you are. They're going to find out what kind of plant I am. And we have done wrong. We have sinned, right? Maybe not in horrible, terrible, bad ways, but even the holy ones have sinned. So we get what we deserve on some level. It's when he spares us from whether it's tribulation or pain or suffering, that's mercy. We deserve all of that. So the persecution, right? Look at his son. The God Jah does not play games, right? He does like to have fun. We're fun, right? There's cats, there's dogs, right? We like to have fun. Kids, fun. Even Jesus wanted kids, right? A little fun. We wanted to play with them, right? He wanted to enjoy. We wanted to enjoy their innocence in a wholesome way. But when it comes to these things, right? When it comes to violating what is holy, we're in a condition, in a state where tribulation and stuff, this has all got to happen because of what happened. And we're moving forward to get through this stuff. All right, so tribulation shows what kind of person we are. Now, it's not permanent, right? Think Peter. Don't get down on yourself if you have been weak. Or if maybe you fail in the future and you're like, I'm sown among the rocky places. I didn't do what I should have done. I failed. No, you didn't. Well, yeah, you did. You failed once. Okay? You get more chances. This isn't a once and done thing. Right? Some are more significant than others, but wouldn't you say Peter's was pretty significant? Okay, but he had a change. He came back, and then he suffered later. He didn't avoid suffering. He avoided it for a little while, right? but he had time to make amends and to get it right. He would have been killed anyway at some point, rather probably in the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So there's no escape in that way. It's all about demonstrating our faith to the best we can, best extent we can. And when we fail, when we don't do the best extent we can, we don't allow that to stop us the next time. And if we do, guess what? We won't let it stop us the next time. And guess what? If you fail then, next time. You do it next time then. And even the next, keep telling yourself next time. At some point, you will drive yourself insane to the point to where you do it right. You can get it right. If it's your desire to do it right and you keep telling yourself, I'm going to get this right, you will get it right. So it's only quitting, right? It's only failing and shutting down and saying, I give up. I'm not going to try to have faith or do the right things. I'm just going to embrace sin and forget it, right? It's over. I'll enjoy a little bit of life and I'm done. Well, then great. The ones who want to keep trying, you get back up and then you keep having faith. And you remember the great cloud of witnesses that you have of people in the past that you can look at who had to go through difficulty, who had to leave their home country like Abraham, right? Who had to go through all kinds of different things. So that's going to happen one way or the other as a Christian or as a non-Christian. If you're a Christian and you've come to this point like I have, well, then at least you've realized there's a reason why you would stand up for this stuff, right? Why you would go through tribulation on account of the word. Matthew 24, are you ready? Okay, we're going to read this account together. A lot of stuff here. This is a big one. We'll stop at points. Here we go. While he was sitting upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him, that is Jesus, privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? Right? He was talking about how the temple would be left without a stone upon a stone. Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your presence and of the conclusion of the system of things? Now you have at least two things here and possibly three, right? Watchtower, you'd have three, right? You have these things talking about the temple being destroyed, that they're all observing that he says, not a stone will be left upon a stone. Then you have the sign of his presence, parousia, and then the conclusion of the system of things. I think it could be, this could be considered either way, right? No matter how you view parousia, right? There's definitely a period of time after which Jesus arrives that something happens, right? So if your Watchtower, you believe he arrived and in 1914 to 1919 and has been, doing various work as he's separating sheep from goats, or depending on how they see that as something in process or ultimately taking place. Definitely doing separating work, right? Through the good news and the preaching work. So in their view, it's been happening since that time. But it could also just be that he arrives and then does a separating work that we don't know how long it would take. It could be instantaneous. It could be several hours. It could be a day. It could be years. Doesn't seem like it would have to be years based on the account. We're going to get to it. And then he makes a judgment, and then there's an end, right? So there's either a decades, maybe a centuries plus parousia. At this point, it would be a century plus, right? For Watchtower. Or there's a smaller time of parousia. A couple hours, a day, a few days, right? We don't know. So there's definitely a period of time. And I think even probably with coming, in some sense, depending on the context, not necessarily just because of the word coming, but in association with the context, I think it leads to this event of time and judgment. The arrival would be the coming, and then the activity that happens after the arrival, followed by the end. Either way, two or three things right here. That's their question. They're talking about at least two or three things. If it's three, the second two are related to each other, right? When will these things be? Talks about the things that they're talking about in Matthew 24. Let's just go to it real quick. So we're not taking my word for it necessarily, although I think most of you know this account, right? Matthew 24:1, departing now, Jesus on his way from the temple, was on his way from the temple. His disciples approached him, showed him the buildings. In response, he said to them, do you behold these things? Truly I say to you, by no means will a stone be left upon a stone and not be thrown down. Right? So that's talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So that's this. When will that's what they react to. Now, what's been on their mind is probably a lot of things, right? Because they react to what he says about the temple, and they ask, well, when's that going to happen, right? When are these things going to happen? And what will, right? So what will be the sign of your presence? Well, he's with them, right? He's with them right now. So they would have to be thinking about a future time where he would be present. What will be the sign, right? How are we going to know you're here? And of the conclusion, the end, telos. So they're clearly talking about right then the destruction of the temple stuff and about a future time where they will need a sign in order to know he's with them. It can't be that they're asking about his presence right then because he's already with them and they wouldn't need a sign, right? Verse 4, in answer, Jesus said to them, look out that nobody misleads you. That's number one. Look out. Watch it. Be careful. Somebody's going to try to mislead you. For many will come on the basis of my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you are not terrified. Don't be afraid. There's going to be wars. You're going to hear about this stuff. Don't be afraid. Because, or for. In the Greek, Matthew 24:6. Matthew 24:6 uses the word gar. For these things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation. Right? So he just said wars and reports of wars. Another use of gar in verse 7. There's explanations going on here is what that indicates. Right? So, for example, verse 4, look out that nobody misleads you. For Matthew 24:5 uses gar. For many will come on the basis of my name, right? It explains that. It's explaining what he just said. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. See that you're not terrified, for these things are going to happen. Don't worry about it. Just don't let it bother you. Because these things are going to happen. Okay, I'm telling you right now. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. That's this right here. This nation again, this is just wars and reports of wars, right? I know the Watchtower believes that it's World War I and that it was like this nation rising against nation and one after the other and this just ongoing, escalation of events. But that's not what it says. It just says a nation will rise against nation, right? That's one against another one. And kingdom against kingdom. That's one against another one. It doesn't mean there wouldn't be others involved. But he's basically saying the same thing he said right here. You're going to hear of wars and reports of wars. For these things must happen. Wars and reports of wars. And then he explains the wars that he's talking about. Nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be food shortages and earthquakes in one place after another. All these things are a beginning of pangs of distress. Then people will deliver you up to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be objects of hatred by all the nations on account of my name. Now, the question is, what period of time are we talking about here? Right. Remember, he's answering at least 2, possibly 3 questions. The second and third would be related to each other. One, he's answering about the temple, and then he's answering about the sign of his presence and the conclusion of the system. He talks about these things: wars, false Christs, earthquakes, food shortages, as the beginning of distress. And then it says they would be delivered up, people would kill them, they'd be in tribulation, right? So now we've got that word again, tribulation, coming up in the context of their question about the temple being destroyed and the sign of his presence into the system of things. We're not sure exactly, this could fit into one or both of those, right? Let's go on and see if we can maybe more comfortably categorize what he's talking about here, when this would happen. Right? When's this tribulation that he's talking about where they would kill us because of his name? Verse 10, then also many will be stumbled and will betray one another and will hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and mislead many. Excuse me. Verse 12. And because of the increasing of lawlessness, the love of the greater number will cool off. But he that has endured to the end is the one that will be saved. And this good news of the kingdom will be preached all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now, I'm going to give you my understanding of these texts to this point, okay? Now, I believe Jesus gave a summary response to all 3 or both of the questions he was asked. Let me explain. Right? All of this could apply to both. I'm going to say 2 questions, okay, just so it's not confusing. 1 question about the temple, 1 question about his presence, inclusive of the end, okay? So when I say two questions, that's what I mean. All of this could apply to both, in terms of when these things would happen, right? Because this would be, about 40 years after this, all of this would still be happening. They would be delivered up, right, by tribulation. You can think of Nero, of course, killing many Christians, other emperors, other people, conflicts with the Jews. Many were stumbled, false prophets, increasing of lawlessness. All these things happened all the way from the time of Jesus and his death to the destruction of the temple. He that has endured to the end will be saved. Now, this, to me, could be the end of the time when they are saved from the Jewish system of things, right? That they've made it through all of this stuff that would happen up until the point when the temple is destroyed. And they've endured to the end, right? If you read in Josephus, the Jewish war, about all the things that happened up through the destruction of the temple. And then Jesus warns the Christians about what to do. Right? So if you look at it in that context, if you look at it and say, okay, they endured through to the end of the Jewish system of things, right? Because remember, at this time, the temple's in effect. Everything's working. Everything is in effect and functioning as a Jewish society. Synagogues, temple, right? The Romans aren't trying to destroy them. They're not trying to destroy the Romans necessarily. Not openly, by rebellion anyway. So if you looked at it in that sense, right, then this becomes consecutive, right? This follows that, right? He that has endured to the end will be saved. Okay, so if that is a step to this, right? Because look, there are 2 ends here. Here's the first one. He that is endured to the end. That's one. What end? Well, it could be the end of one's life, right? What if you're killed before the destruction of the temple? But you kept enduring, right? You didn't give up. You didn't quit. And you were killed in, say, 60 AD, 60 CE. You endured to the end, right? Is that what it's talking about? Well, again, if you were killed, then by default it was in your case, right? But really the context is about what? When the temple would be destroyed. So it could be that enduring to the end of that event would mean, right, if you get through that, you'll be saved. Because then the good news of the kingdom will be preached to all the nations. You'll have a chance to be a part of this. And then the end will come. Right? So either this is stating this and then restating it again here, if it's the same end, like the end of this system, or this is talking about enduring to the end through the Jewish system, then this is consequential or consecutive. The good news of the kingdom is preached for a witness, and then the end comes, right? That's kind of how I see it. It is possible this and this are the same, but it's kind of an odd way to group things to me. It seems more like these descriptions all apply. This one then puts them through the end of the Jewish system. This follows 70 AD with the good news of the kingdom and then the end coming. Right? The good news was still being preached before 70, but not to the extent that it was after 70. So just some thoughts. Again, this is not meant to be a like hard and fast understanding. I'm not sure exactly whether this is the same as this, but it seems easier for me to read in consecutive order, or that this is more specific to the Jewish system. This is specific to what happens after the end of the Jewish system, and then this after this happens. Either way, let's go now to verse 15, because here Jesus makes a specific reference to another book of the Bible. Notice what he says. Therefore, when you catch sight of the disgusting thing that causes desolation, as spoken through the prophet Daniel, or Daniel the prophet, standing in a holy place, let the reader use discernment. Then let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains. Right? So that's clearly talking about, the Jewish system of things, is it not? But notice the break or change that happened, right? We went through an initial, first they said, when will these things be, right? The Jewish temple being destroyed. And then the sign of your presence. And first he says something kind of just general, right? Don't let anyone mislead you. You're going to hear wars and reports of wars. Don't be terrified. Nation's going to rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. People are going to deliver you up to tribulation because of my name. They're going to betray you, false Christ, false prophets, increasing lawlessness, but you have to endure. He that is endured to the end will be saved. The good news of the kingdom will be preached throughout the earth. Then the end will come. Therefore, right, in verse 15, it uses un, right, which is a conjunction that, again, explains what preceded it. So this is all in the context of him answering the question about the temple being destroyed and the sign of his presence. It's not talking about the sign of his presence right then, because he's with them, and he wouldn't need a sign to indicate that. So they're talking about a future event where it concerns his presence. But they're also talking about the Jewish system of things and when the temple will be destroyed. So he says, therefore, as an explanation, when you catch sight of the disgusting thing causing desolation, as spoken of through Daniel, you got to leave. Okay? In other words, so I've given you a summary. See, in my opinion, as I read this, This is the initial summary that he gives them. This is Jesus' initial reply that starts with a warning, discusses what will happen to them specifically, being delivered up, stumbled, betrayed, and then all the way through to the end. Right? So to me, this covers through to 70 CE and then beyond. And I think this is probably an indication of making it through the 70 CE destruction, although not necessarily. I just think it could be. And then this is talking about the variant, right? This is talking about this end. The end that is connected with his presence, that they need a sign to tell them he's there. So it's definitely future. So that's why I think this is an initial summary from the start. Don't be misled. These things are going to happen. You're going to be delivered up. Don't give up. Endure to the end. Kingdom will be preached and will come. And then he goes back and refers to Daniel. He goes back and he refers to Daniel and specifically deals with the issue that they're going to have to face regarding the temple. He talks about those in Judea fleeing to the mountains. Verse 17, let the man on the housetop not come down. Don't get your goods. Let the man in the field not return to his house to pick up his outer garment. Woe to the pregnant woman and those suckling a baby in those days. Keep praying that your flight may not occur in wintertime, nor on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the world's beginning until now. No, nor will occur again. This is very significant, and I find it tends to confuse people a little bit, but I think clarity is coming, and I don't have to give it. I think the text gives it. But that's very significant, is it not? He's talking about those fleeing Judea. We're definitely talking about the first century right now, right? The time between Jesus talking and 70 AD when these things happened. He's talking about Judea right here and their flight from Judea because of the Romans. And he says, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the world's beginning until now. And if you read Josephus's War of the Jews, then you'll understand what he's talking about. It was horrific. It was incredible. And it was devastating, of course, to the Jews. But the kinds of things that are recorded, the level of inhumanity and despair that the people of Jerusalem had to go through because of the people that remained there and what they had done prior to that, leading up to the Romans coming, and the different things that people fleeing the city had to go through. You could kind of understand this first part, right? Such as, right, it's so bad, it's never happened that bad. But then this part here, nor will occur again. That's the part that I think trips people up a little bit. Let's find out why. In fact, unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved, but on account of the chosen ones, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there, do not believe it. Someone let a little fly in here. I think that we had the door open earlier. But on account of the chosen ones, those days will be cut short. Verse 23, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and mislead and give great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the chosen ones. Look, I forewarned you. Therefore, if people say to you, look, he's in the wilderness, do not go out. Look, he's in the inner chambers. Do not believe it. For just as the lightning comes out of eastern parts and shines over to western parts, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. Verse 28, wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. And it's talking about the tribulation right that is right here, the great tribulation. Or great tribulation. Let's just verify. It does not have the article. It just says Thlipsis megale. Tribulation great. And then we'll get to the great tribulation in Revelation 7 in a moment. There will be great tribulation such as has not occurred since the world's beginning until now, nor will occur again. And then right here, immediately after the tribulation of those days that we just read about. The tribulation right here that has not occurred since the world's beginning, and that would be unlike any other that would ever occur. After that, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. And then all the tribes of the earth will beat themselves in lamentation. And then they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet sound, and they will gather his chosen ones together from the four winds, from one extremity to the other extremity. Oh, wait, let's go back to our text here. Because we're only going to the end of that verse right here. So notice here, all these events take place after this great tribulation. And that's significant to me, because it indicates that the chosen ones have not been sealed, right? Because as we're going to read in a moment, that's what the angels are doing, holding back the four winds as they're sealing the slaves of God in their forehead. So this does not appear to be a time, this right here, that's described as after the tribulation of those days. It does not appear to be the same as Revelation chapter 7, which we're going to get to in a moment. So there's a period of tribulation here where all this stuff occurs, right? Where there's false Christs, where people are going to have to flee to the mountains, where they're going to have to go through great tribulation, and where the Christians are going to again be tested by various false Christs, up until a point where this tribulation ends, right? Because it says after the tribulation of those days, sun will be dark and moon will not give its light, stars will fall, powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will beat themselves in lamentation, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he will send his angels forth with a great trumpet to gather his chosen ones from one extremity of the earth to their other extremity. Now, I'm going to give you my own understanding of this here for just a moment. I believe that this period of tribulation right here, after the tribulation of those days, is after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Because I believe he's answering them in their question about that, fleeing the Judea to the mountains right before the destruction of the temple. And as I read earlier, this initial summary appears to me to involve enduring to the end and being saved through that destruction of the things he talked about right here. Or I'm sorry, in verses 1 and 2, and that they're questioning about right there in verse 3. And then there's this preaching work, and then the very end right here. Again, this could be the same as this end here, but there's definitely this summary here that goes all the way to the end that includes this reference from Daniel that talks about the disgusting thing causing desolation, of the disgusting thing standing in a holy place. And so this relates, of course, to the Romans and their presence in Jerusalem and ultimately their desecration of the temple. You know, these events, right? Because the Romans came in, they came in from one side of the city, and there were all kinds of different battles at different points, but they focused on one in particular because the Jews were putting up such a resistance. And there were opportunities to flee at different points. It was still very perilous. Nevertheless, and then they had an opportunity, of course, between the coming of Vespasian and Titus, right? Because remember, Vespasian came in 66, and then because of all the events in Rome having to do with Nero, he was recalled or went back, and after he went back, he sent his son Titus to finish the job. So they had an opportunity when Vespasian was even encroaching upon the temple and serving as a disgusting thing that would be causing desolation, right? They had an opportunity even then when they saw that the city was surrounded or about to be attacked, and then the Roman army left, there was an opportunity for them to flee. And then there was great tribulation, right? After the time that they had to flee, when Titus returned. And then it talks about after the tribulation of those days. So after what we just read, which I believe has to do with the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, specifically linked to them fleeing to the mountains between the coming of Vespasian and Titus, but that also includes elements, of course, from the question that relates to the sign of his presence, right? The false Christ, increasing lawlessness, the earthquake. So these could be applicable in both times, the period during which the temple was destroyed and when his presence would be. So he says after that tribulation, and I believe that basically marks it to after 70 AD, which if you watch my Appointed Times of the Nation video, we're going to get to that text in a moment, I believe that after 70 AD, and it certainly seems that there was, after Jesus' resurrection, he sat at the right hand of the Father, and it's possible, I think even equally possible, I believe, that either Satan was thrown down like lightning from heaven after Jesus' resurrection or after 70 AD. And that's because all things were put below his feet when he was put at the right hand of the Father. So I believe that's why it could be likely Satan would be one of those things put under his feet. Or it was after the tribulation of those days and the moon wouldn't give his light. Stars fall from heaven. What happened in Revelation chapter 12? The dragon that drags a third of the stars was thrown out of heaven. And the powers of the heavens were shaken in the battle with Michael and his angels, were they not? And the sign of the Son of Man appeared in heaven, right? In heaven. Because he was victorious. Because he defeated the dragon and threw him out of heaven. And all the tribes of the earth beat themselves in lamentation. Doesn't it say that in Revelation 12? That after Michael and his angels beat the dragon and his angels, the stars that the dragon's tail drags, that it's woe for the earth and for the sea because the devil has come down to you? It says right here is the stars fell from heaven. The powers of the heaven were shaken, and the tribes of the earth have to beat themselves because of it. And that in heaven the sign of the Son of Man was seen. That all to me seems to be contained within the Revelation chapter 12 battle in heaven, which happens after the time, well, let's just go to it real quickly so we can keep one part of it in mind. Revelation chapter 12, right? Because I believe in one sense this is very significant for the Great Tribulation, right? Dragon drags a third of the stars of heaven, hurls them down to the earth. The stars fell from heaven, right? Powers of the heavens have been shaken. The child was caught away to God and to his throne. Woman fled into the wilderness, prepared for a place by God. Right? So the child was caught away to God and to his throne, Jesus as he was resurrected. Then the woman flees into the wilderness, place prepared by God. I believe that happened after the temple was destroyed. War broke out in heaven, right? So because this event, the woman fleeing into the wilderness, right? If the woman is the nation of Israel that gave birth to the child that's been caught away to God's throne, the woman is fleeing. It's going away. The woman is going away. And that's what happened with the temple in Jerusalem. The woman went away. The woman that gave birth to the male child, in terms of the literal physical sense of being the nation of Israel, fled into the wilderness. Right? And that's consistent with the appointed times of the nations, during which Jerusalem is trampled. She's in the wilderness. She's had to flee away after the resurrection of the Christ. And now we see, of course, Israel here again today. I'm not going to get into that so much as point out the fact that this all fits with the same context of discussion that we're talking about right here. And the tribulation that ends, after which all this stuff takes place, including the stars falling from heaven, the powers of the heavens being shaken, the sign of the Son of Man appearing in heaven, the tribes of themselves beating themselves in lamentation. Great woe for the earth. And then they'll see the Son of Man coming with power and great glory, right? Later. It's all sequential. He'll send forth his angels with a great trumpet sound. They'll gather his chosen ones from the four winds, right? And that's essentially what we see said in Revelation chapter 7. We're going to get to it. Well, let's just go to it real quickly, because remember, what does it say right here? I saw another angel having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the trees, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until after we have sealed the slaves of our God in their foreheads. Right? So that's basically the same thing as we're reading right here. Sending forth his angels to gather his chosen ones from the four corners of the earth, right? They're holding back the four winds while they seal the slaves of our God. And then a parallel account from Mark 13. In those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened. After that tribulation, there's clearly a first tribulation that occurred between the time Jesus is speaking and the destruction of Jerusalem. After which, the woman fled into the wilderness, Satan was thrown down, woe for the earth, and the sealing of God's slaves followed. The stars will be falling out of heaven, powers of the heavens will be shaken, they'll see the Son of Man coming. He will send forth his angels, gather his chosen ones from the four winds, from earth's extremity to heaven's extremity. Now, from the fig tree. Now, notice it says from earth's extremity to heaven's extremity. Right? Well, what does that remind you of? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Those sleeping God will bring with him. Those are the ones in heaven's extremity. And then those in the earth who are sleeping, and then those who are alive at his coming, right? All three are spoken about. So he brings those who are sleeping with him. They raise up the dead, and they're given their new bodies. of those who are sleeping, God brings with him, and that is their resurrection, right? They're sleeping, and he wakes them up and gives them a new body as they come and get, right? So they're given a new body. They're sleeping with God. He gives them a new body. So they're the first resurrection. Then they come and they take those who are living and they're gathered together to be with the Christ. From earth's extremity to heaven's extremity. That's the exact same thing Paul's talking about in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Now, from the fig tree, learn the illustration. Just as soon as its young branch grows tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Likewise, also you, when you see these things happening, know that he is near at the doors. Truly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but the Father. We'll talk about this verse more in our Bible in the Trinity and Conflict series coming up. But notice it speaks of the angels and the Son on a parallel level, right? Nobody knows. And the Holy Spirit isn't even mentioned. So, again, the Father is put on an exclusive level, even on a knowledge basis, so clearly not co-equal with the Son, right? Whom the Trinitarian says co-equal with God, the Father, in terms of his knowledge. Clearly, that is not true, as Revelation 1:1 also teaches us clearly. So, there's a lot of things that take place here. And this generation, of course, until all these things happen, is a text that has been used by Watchtower often, as I talked about earlier. And what they ended up doing was tying this to the events of 1914, right? So, yet these things here have all happened. So this text is actually true in its context, right? Sun will be darkened, moon not give its light, stars fall from heaven, power shaken. Well, if that's Revelation chapter 12, the stars that fell from heaven, the powers of the heavens being shaken, and the sign of the Son of Man coming in clouds with power and great glory, and he's sending his angels to gather his chosen ones, right? So the sign of victory of the Son of Man that was seen in heaven, right? Remember, the sign of the Son of Man, it says, is seen in heaven. And so it's something that may have been visible to people on earth, but without fully understanding it. But it is a heavenly sign. These are the powers of the heavens, the stars falling out of heaven, the angels, the stars that the dragon's tail drags, that we just read. And then they will see the Son of Man coming with power and great glory. He'll send his angels, gather his chosen ones from earth's extremity to heaven's extremity. So this kind of seems to me to be referring to a pretty narrow event, right? Seems to me that so we have the tribulation. After that tribulation, so let's say this refers to 70 CE. That tribulation, the one that's done, and then it says after that tribulation. So that's the tribulation to 70 CE. Then, if this is Revelation 12, that's the devil being thrown out of heaven. And then Jesus is being enthroned as king right after Revelation 12, right? And the work that he talked about previously of the good news being preached in all the inhabited earth, right? He talked about enduring to the end of the Jewish system of things, which would be right here, after that tribulation. And then he talked about enduring to the end, if that's referring to the Jewish temple destruction. And then he talked about the good news being preached. And then the end coming, right? The end. Unless those two ends are the same, again, as I've mentioned. But it seems to me kind of a redundancy, although it's still possible. Sometimes how the Bible writes things to emphasize things. But it may be that there's the endurance to the end of the Jewish system, followed by the preaching work, and then the end of the system of things. All part of the answer to the double question. The two-part question, which actually has a third part, depending on how you look at the second question. Right? So you get the Revelation 12, and then you get the preaching work. You get the gathering together of the chosen ones. Now, this kind of condenses it a little bit, right? Not every account makes it so clear that there's like time, how much time is here. It just doesn't do that. It just gives sequential descriptions of events. So sometimes they can seem very close together. when in fact their actual execution and fulfillment might be more further apart. We don't know how long these things take, right? How long did this take? How long did the battle in heaven take? This is just a day? We don't know, right? Who knows? Who knows how long they fought? It says Michael and his angels battled with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels battled. How long did that take? We don't know. Yet it seems like pretty fast, huh? Probably not. Probably not like instantaneous. How long? I don't know. Right? You see what I'm saying, though? There are events that are not given a time frame. They're just specified. They're just described as happening. So it's important to keep that in mind, because it can sometimes make us think, well, this is like, how could this happen right so fast? Well, we don't really know how long it took. It just says that that's what happened. It could have actually been a couple years. I don't know. I don't know how those things work, right? I don't know how a spiritual battle in the heavens transpires. I don't know the mechanics of, we don't know what it's involved. We know God can obviously devastate what he wants, but that's not what it says happened. It's not God fighting right there. It's Michael. All right, let's move forward a little bit. So we've got in these accounts so far from Matthew, right? Matthew 24 and Mark 13. There's a lot going on there about the Jewish system of things coming to an end, right? The time when they would have to flee Judea. And then there's a lot going on when it comes to the end, right? The end. After he gathers his chosen ones, after the powers of the heavens are shaken and the stars fall out of heavens, then the end comes. Right? So there's a lot of that mixed together in those accounts, but it's all there. I've read descriptions of events that to me describe both the events leading up to 70 CE and the events that would mark the sign of his presence, a presence they would need him to give a sign for, because it wasn't that time, because he was already present with them and they didn't need a sign. But they would later, after he was caught away to God and to his throne. They wanted to know, how are we going to know you're here when you leave and you come back? What's going to be the sign? All this stuff. Okay, and it was true back then as well. Was it not? Right after he was caught away to God and to his throne, everything was put beneath his feet, and he was maneuvering events and being with the Christian, right? He appeared to Paul, converted Paul. He was active and doing things with them all the time, all the way up to the events of 70 CE that he told them about, right? You don't think he was watching and making sure and finding out who would listen and what they would do and helping whatever he wanted to take place happen? Of course. And then thereafter, right? Sending the angels to gather together the chosen ones. Very similar again with the account we see in Matthew 13 about the angels going forth and gathering together the wheat and burning up the weeds. Now let's look at this account in 2 Thessalonians. Let's start in chapter 1, verse 6. This takes into account that it is righteous on God's part to repay tribulation to those who make tribulation for you. But to you who suffer tribulation, relief with us at the revelation of the Lord Jesus from heaven with his powerful angels. In a flaming fire, as he brings judgment upon those who do not know God and those who do not obey the good news about our Lord Jesus. These very ones will undergo the judicial punishment of everlasting destruction from before the Lord and from the glory of his strength. At the time when he comes to be glorified in connection with his holy ones, to be regarded in that day with wonder, in connection with all those who exercise faith, because the witness we gave met with faith among you. To that very end, indeed, we always pray for you, that our God may count you worthy of his calling and perform completely all that he pleases, of goodness and the work of faith with power, in order that the name of our Lord Jesus may be glorified in you, and you in union or in him, in union with or in him, in accord with the undeserved kindness of our God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. However, brothers, respecting the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we request you. Right? So he's clearly, again, he's talking about the same thing in 1 Thessalonians 4, are being gathered away with them. He was talking about it here, right, that when the time comes to be glorified in connection with the holy ones, all who exercised faith. But he says, we request of you not to be quickly shaken from your reason, nor to be excited through an inspired expression or through a verbal message, or through a letter as though from us, to the effect that the day of Jehovah is here. Now, I believe, of course, this should be the day of the Lord is here, but we're not going to get off and talk about the divine name right now. There are several, there are many times, 100 or so, I think. I'd have to look at my chart. It's been a while. I think over 100 times where there's use of the divine name that in the New Testament I don't think should be there because it's not based on a quotation of the Old Testament. The NWT has its reasons for why they identify the Lord in certain texts as Jehovah. And either way, we'll just set it aside for now. But I want to point that out because when I don't agree with the NWT on the use of the divine name, I feel it's my obligation to point that out. So he says, don't get excited, right? This subject of the day of Jehovah, the day of the Lord, right? The parousia specifically refers to the parousia of the Lord Jesus and being gathered together with him, right? The end, the resurrection, all this stuff that's supposed to happen. He doesn't want them to get excited from an inspired expression, a verbal message, or a letter, right? So an inspired expression, something from the Bible, probably, or a verbal message, someone tells you something, or a letter regarding the day of the Lord or Jehovah being here. So we're not supposed to get excited. So it's something we should really be careful with. We're really not supposed to be letting this excite us and get us motivated for anything, right? It's going to happen, it happens. We don't know when it's going to happen. That's the whole point. It's a thief in the night. You got to be ready every day, all the time. And it's not that hard if you really want to be. If you don't want to be, well, that's not hard either. They're both pretty easy if you just want to do one or the other. But one will lead to life. One will let you be in a position of readiness. And then he says, let no one seduce you in any manner, because it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness gets revealed, the son of destruction. We'll talk about that subject another time. But I believe that refers to the Antichrist. Either way, let's go now to Revelation chapter 13. So here, again, a lot of good information, right? He talks about tribulation once again. God will give it back to him, right? We may have to take it. They're going to get it. As long as we suffer for the right reason, it will be worth it. We'll get the relief, right? And he's described as coming from heaven with his powerful angels in a flaming fire, right? And he talks about we referred to the account in Matthew 13 about how it talks about the gathering of people as wheat, and then the gathering of weeds to be burned as with fire. And of course, we've been talking about the text from Matthew 24 and Mark 13 about how the answer to the question in Matthew 24:3 about the Jewish temple and the sign of his presence. He talked about how there would be this preaching work that seemed to be thereafter or extending past if it started before, and it would have, of course, with the ministry after Jesus' death, the tribulation of the time of the Jewish temple, right? Because remember earlier, it clearly left that tribulation alone after the tribulation of those days. So there was a clear separation from an earlier great tribulation. And it didn't call it the Great Tribulation. It just said Great Tribulation. Now, it could be referring to the same one, although, again, it went on to say that after that tribulation, that these other events would occur. And in Revelation, it does refer to, we're going to read it in a moment, the Great Tribulation, or the Tribulation the Great. Tes thlipseos, tes megales. So it is more specific, or at least with the use of the article. All right, and then we had him talking about people not getting excited about this presence, right? That they were going to be gathered together, just like he had told them in the First Thessalonians letter, but not to get too excited about it. Now, Revelation 13. I'm gonna jump to Revelation here because we're gonna read a few texts and then go back, right? I think I'm trying to give the context of all these texts, not just one or two verses, right? But there are just discussions of this issue in multiple books and parts of the Bible. So it's not just this linear discussion of the Great Tribulation. So I've tried to take sections of the Bible that fit, in my opinion, the way I read it, in a fairly sequential manner, or that give us repeated descriptions of the same events, but maybe a little different. All right, Revelation 13. Listen to this. Now remember, we talked about how this involves the Revelation 12, right? Stars falling from heaven, powers of the heavens being shaken, how this would happen after the tribulation of the first century. And then it would be followed by this preaching work, the sign of the Son of Man. This all happens in connection with this. And the only thing that really happens that's like that is Revelation 12, where it specifically talks about powers of the heavens being shaken. I mean, there being a war in heaven. How much more shaken could the powers of the heavens be if not from that event? And then the stars, 1/3 of the stars of heaven being thrown out. Well, that sounds to me like stars falling out of heaven and powers of the heavens being shaken in a time when you would see this sign of the Son of Man with great power and glory after he just beat Satan and threw him out, because he has all authority in heaven and on earth, and everyone is being put under his feet. The earth is a stool for God's feet. The heavens are his throne. The Son of Man is sitting on God's throne. The earth is his footstool. The devil is thrown down to the earth. The devil is his footstool. His enemies beneath his feet. So we saw that. I saw another wild beast ascending out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, but it began speaking as a dragon. Now that's very interesting, isn't it? And this all happens after the events of Revelation chapter 12, right? This all takes place in response to the powers of the heavens being shaken. This is a part of the lamentation, the woe for the earth that we read earlier and that we're going to read again in Revelation 12. Right now, we're just past that. We're seeing the reasons why the woe is being told to us. The devil is active. He's got this wild beast that looks like a lamb, right? So what does that indicate? It's like some kind of Christian thing, right? Well, a lamb is clearly, especially in this context and in the New Testament, a Christian reference, a reference to Christ, right? But instead of being a lamb that was slaughtered for God, this lamb is a fake. It's a fraud. It's a dragon. Either the devil himself or a demon, right? But, who's to say, right? In the context, it kind of seems like Satan's bringing forth these beasts, but he may be manifesting himself through one of them as this false Christ, right? This man of lawlessness, this son of destruction, this antichrist. Right? Doesn't this seem like it's something of an antichrist here? Horns like a lamb, but talks like a dragon. That seems to me like a false Christ of some kind, a false religion or a false person, or it seems like something that's trying to pretend to be a Christian or a Christ-like thing, but that's not. And it says it exercises all the authority of the first wild beast in its sight, and it makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first wild beast, whose death stroke God healed. That's very interesting. And it performs great signs so that even it should even make fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the sight of mankind. Now, I believe there's a number of ways to interpret this, but I'm not going to get into too much because I want to try to stay on topic, the tribulation part. I don't want to get necessarily off onto what all this could represent. Maybe in the future I will. But notice that this second wild beast that looks like a false Christ makes people worship the first wild beast. So it's got this feature, though, right, that makes people think it's actually something it's not. And then while it's faking, pretending, lying, being something it's not, it makes people do this. And at the same time, it does this. And then it says it misleads those who dwell on the earth because of the signs that were granted to it to perform in the sight of the first wild beast, while it tells those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the wild beast that had the sword stroke and yet revived. And there was granted to it to give breath to the image of the wild beast. So the image of the wild beast, this is why we're reading this account right here. The image of the wild beast should both speak and cause to be killed all those who would not in any way worship the image of the wild beast. And it puts under compulsion the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slaves, that they should give these a mark in their right hand or upon their forehead, and that nobody might be able to buy or sell except the person having the mark, the name of the wild beast or the number of its name. Here's where wisdom comes in. Let the one that has intelligence calculate the number of the wild beast, for it's a man's number. Its number is 666. I did a whole other video on this, or an open discussion about it. Look in the open session playlist. But let's go up here real quick, right? So what we're dealing with here, right, all of this is after the devil's been thrown down. He goes down to the sand of the sea, and these wild beasts come out. After the powers of the heavens are shaken. After the stars fall from heaven. Then all of this occurs. During this time, of course, the good news would have to be being preached, which ever since the first century it has been. And this beast that looks like a lamb, right, a false Christian, restores the image of the first wild beast, and then causes to be killed any who won't worship it, and puts people under compulsion to receive a mark, which is the number, the name of the wild beast, or the number of its name. So this to me seems like a period of tribulation. Now, what's interesting is, remember back when we read in Matthew 24, right here it said, "For then there will be great tribulation, as has not occurred since the world's beginning until now, nor will occur again." And then it says immediately after the tribulation of those days, all this stuff takes place. But look at what it says takes place. Sun darkened, moon doesn't give us light, stars fall from heaven, powers of heavens are shaken, sign of the Son of Man in heaven. The earth beats itself in lamentation. And then he sends forth his angels to gather his chosen ones. So this great tribulation right here ends right here, after which all this stuff occurs, which includes the earth in lamentation, which is obviously great tribulation. But there was something about this tribulation that was different from any other that would ever occur again. And I ask you to read Josephus, The Jewish War. And it's unlike anything I think you've ever heard about. Even other wars, even other invasions. There's so many interesting things that happened and incredibly horrific things. But it clearly ends, does it not? It says right there, after the tribulation of those days, these days right here. It says right here, then there will be great tribulation. In fact, unless those days, the great tribulation days. And then it says the tribulation of those days. These things would happen. And these things include a great tribulation right there. The very tribulation, I believe, described in Revelation 12. Woe for the earth and for the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great anger, knowing he has a short period of time. So just because there's a tribulation in 70 AD that was unlike any other since the beginning of the world or that would ever happen, doesn't mean it's not going to be bad or that it won't be difficult. And it will also be something we should be confident in, right? This has to happen. And if we're spared, then this is salvation for us. If others are not spared, well, they were ones who didn't even try to help those who were in need, Christ's brothers, as you'll see. But they didn't even have to be Christian. They just had to show some mercy to those who are enduring all this tribulation, as you're going to see. We'll read it in a moment. But I think it's very clear. The great tribulation of Matthew 24:21 ends in Matthew 24:29, after which there is another tribulation, a great tribulation, as we're going to see, just not one that was like that time. Matthew 13, okay, we already read that. So now let's go to Revelation. Where did we stop here? Oh yeah, buy or sell, receive the mark, 666. We're just going to keep going, right into Revelation 14. And I saw, right after all this stuff here. Let's just go to Revelation 13 to make sure. Told you guys we had a lot of reading, but this is the only way to really do this right? I could make a short video. I could just say boom, 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 boom. That's what I think. We have to get into this stuff. Yeah, it takes a little more time. Break up the video, right? Watch a half hour here, there, and you'll have it all. But if we don't spend time and really go into this stuff, well, then other questions will just come up, won't they? So let's do it. Let's just get it done right. And I saw and looked the Lamb standing upon Mount Zion, right? After all this, after the wild beast is brought forth that looks like a false Christ, an antichrist, or a false religion of some kind, of something false related to the Christ, horns like a lamb, speak like a dragon, puts everybody under compulsion. Now, I've had some people say, well, what are Christians going to do here, Greg? If we're not able to buy or sell unless we have the mark, what are we going to do? Well, that's why it's very important for us to stay together, isn't it? Because we can help each other. We can help each other get through if we don't fragment and fracture to such an extent that we don't trust each other. This is what happens, what the wicked one does. But there's another way. There's another way that we get through this. If we're people who survive to the end and then we're caught away, right? Because you can see that's Christians. How are we going to get through this time when we can't buy or sell unless we have the mark? And we have to show that we don't have the mark to be among these people, right? The Lamb standing upon Mount Zion, with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. And of course, in the book of Hebrews, it explicitly refers to a heavenly Mount Zion as the heavens, where they will be together, right? It's like John 14. I'm going away, I'm going to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you also may be. In the house of my Father, there are many abodes. So the 144,000, whom I believe, and I've talked about before, I did a whole video on it, are all Christians, Jews and Gentiles. As you're going to see here in a moment, just let me go on. But I believe they're all Christians, represented as the nation of Israel. Because like Paul talks about in Romans, it's through the grafting in of the Gentiles that all Israel is saved. I did a whole video on the 144,000. I strongly encourage you to watch it. And you're going to see that there's a grafting in that I believe is shown as these 144,000 are described. And then it says, verse 2, I heard a sound out of heaven, right? Because they're in what? Heavenly Mount Zion, like I just said from Hebrews. I heard a sound out of heaven, as the sound of many waters, the sound of loud thunder, and the sound I heard was singers who accompany themselves in the harp playing on their harps. And they're singing as if a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and elders. And no one was able to master that song but the 144,000 who've been bought from the earth. These are the ones that not defile themselves with women. In fact, they are virgins. I talked about all this in the 144,000 video. Paul explicitly refers to the Christians as virgins promised in marriage to the Christ. James refers to people who are promised in marriage to the Christ but who have relations with the world as adulteresses, right? So there's a spiritual virginity that the Bible talks about that I believe applies here. These are the ones that keep following the Lamb no matter where he goes, right? That's Christians, right? Christians follow the Lamb. My sheep know my voice, right? And they listen to me. These were bought from the earth among mankind as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. Christians are referred to as first fruits and as bought with Christ's blood. No falsehood was found in their mouths. They are without blemish. In my 144,000 video, I did a whole discussion about how this description is used, not to refer to people as having no defect or never sinned, but in a representative sense in which Christ's righteousness has been imputed to us so that we're viewed in this sense because of being purified through him as his bride. And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven. He had everlasting good news to declare as glad tidings to those who dwell on the earth and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people, saying in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of the judgment by him has arrived. So worship the one who made the earth, the heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. Right? So there seems to be a distinction here. Seems like I don't think this is necessarily referring to the 144,000, right? Because they're in heaven with the Christ. And here, this angel is speaking to those who dwell on the earth, among every nation, tribe, people, and tongue. And then in verse 8 it says, and a second angel followed, saying, she is fallen. Babylon the great is fallen, she who made all the nations drink of the wine of the anger of her fornication. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying in a loud voice, if anyone worships the wild beast and its image, and receives a mark on his forehead or upon his hand, he will also drink of the wine of the anger of God that is poured out undiluted into the cup of his wrath, and he shall be tormented with fire and sulfur in the sight of the holy angels and in the sight of the Lamb. Remember, Paul talked about in 2 Thessalonians earlier how Jesus would come with his angels in a flaming fire to bring destruction upon those who do not know God. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, day and night, and they have no rest. And those who worship the wild beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. And now I believe, of course, all spirits return to the God who gave it. And in the end, all the spirits are judged, right? All human spirits are judged, the final judgment, except those who are part of the first resurrection, right? After this, they can't be subject to the second death. But when the spirits who are judged unfavorably is not in the book of life, where are they thrown, right? They're all thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the devil is, the false prophet, the wild beast. So in that sense, their spirits may continue on, but in this state of captivity within the lake of fire, where they exist as spirits, right? A spirit is basically fire. So it's not like total torment and torture in the sense where like their flesh is continually being burned. It's their spirit. And there's a sense in which it's God's spirit that he gave to that person. And so if he assigns it to the lake of fire, whatever the condition of that spirit is, it could be consistent with what we have right here. Doesn't mean that they're consciously being, they're aware, and they're in the lake of fire as a fiery spirit. And in the sense in which they're held captive in that lake of fire, experience these conditions. My thinking about it metaphysically in terms of how the lake of fire and spirits are presented. Either way, it's destruction, right? It's not an existence, life like we know it now. And I certainly don't believe their physical bodies are there being burned up forever. There's nothing in the Bible that talks about that. And let's see. Here's where it means endurance for the holy ones, those who observe the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, right? So we are going to have, this is a tribulation. Something we're going to have to go through where we're going to be put under compulsion, like it says right here, to receive this mark or the name of this beast. And so it's something that we're going to have to deal with that seems to be a part of this tribulation that's described after the tribulation of those days in the first century. Revelation chapter 6, and when he opened the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those slaughtered because of the word of God, because of the witness work they used to have. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, until when, sovereign Lord, holy and true, are you refraining from judging and avenging our blood upon those who dwell upon the earth? And a white robe was given to them, and they were told to rest a little while longer, until the number was filled also of their fellow slaves and their brothers, who were about to be killed as they had also been. And I saw when he opened the sixth seal, and a great earthquake occurred, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the entire moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as when a fig tree, shaken by a high wind, casts its unripe figs. And the heaven departed as a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and every island were removed from their places. And the kings of the earth, and the top-ranking ones, and the military commanders, and the rich, and the strong ones, and every slave, and every free person, hid themselves in caves and in the rock masses of the mountains. And they keep saying to the mountains and to the rock masses, fall over and hide us from the face of the one seated upon the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, because the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Now, so this is all leading up to events, right? Because he's telling them right here, they got to rest. They got to rest until this happens. Right there. Except for the ones who are alive at the present, right? And they're caught away to be with the Lord. They're an exception. But they're going through part of the tribulation and then being taken away. Or, he takes them away right before. It depends on where you see the tribulation beginning. At what point. And at what point he arrives, right? So, how long, for example, after he arrives, does he take those who belong to him, who are living, up from the earth to be with him in the heavens? We don't know. And then it says, right, so it says they got to wait a little while until all this happens. But then all this happens as well. Right? And so the angels, it says, all these events are taking place, and so the nations are going through this constant panic and chaos. And it says, another angel ascends from the sun rising, having a seal of the living God, cries out with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until after we have sealed the slaves of our God in their foreheads, which is exactly what those who had already died faithful are told they have to wait for. So we know there's been some Christians who have died and who are with God, sleeping with him, but who are represented. Remember, they're all living to God. So he is able to actually commune with them if he wants to. They're living to him. It says that, Jesus says that explicitly in the Bible. They're not living to us, they're living to him. And so whether this is a representational conversation in terms of representing the condition of their spirit as they wait patiently for God to bring justice, or they actually speak to him because they're living to him in that sense, either way, they're told they have to wait, right? And during the waiting period, all that happens. All this stuff happens. Stars of the heaven happen, right? So these could be people who died after the time of Jesus, all the way up to the point of 70 CE. And then these events happen. The stars of the earth, stars of heaven fall to the earth. Right? I think this is kind of a condensed version, but it includes that from Revelation 12, at least in my view, which I think happened probably around 70 AD, although it could have been after Jesus was resurrected to heaven. One or the other, in my view. But either way, I think that's represented right there. And then all these different events are represented here. All the different events that are spoken of elsewhere in Revelation are kind of condensed right here and here, because it's trying to get to this right here, right? Remember, this is why they're waiting. And then it talks about them waiting, all this stuff happening, and then the completion of this work right here is described right here. Don't hurt anything until we finish this work right here. Don't hurt anything. And the number of people we've got to seal is 144,000 sealed out of every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then it lists all the tribes of Israel, although it's not actually the literal tribes of Israel, right? Because you have the tribe of Manasseh, not Dan. Put that little note there. And so to me, this kind of seems like maybe a representation of the Gentiles being grafted in. It's like a spiritual representation of Israel, but with Manasseh representing the Gentiles, from my one possible view. Certainly a reason why Manasseh is referenced and not Dan. But either way, it talks about these being the tribes from which the 144,000 are sealed. And remember, in the book of James, he opens up referring to the Christians as the 12 tribes scattered about. And Paul talks about Christians being Jews on the inside, not on the outside. Even if they're already Jews on the outside, it's about being a Jew on the inside, circumcised of the heart, spiritual Israel. I believe that's what you have here. I believe you have in this spiritual representation, not literal listing of tribes, the Christians being presented as the nation of Israel that is saved by the grafting in of all the Gentiles, which I see as that right there. And then it says, after these things I saw and look a great crowd which no man was able to number, out of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, dressed in white robes. And there were palm branches in their hands, right? So they're in white robes, and they're before the throne of God and the Lamb. And they cry with a loud voice, saying, salvation we owe to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne, and the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell upon their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, amen, the blessing, the glory, and the wisdom, and the thanksgiving, and the honor, and the power, and the strength be to our God forever and ever. Now, this whole before the throne, I've written about it. I've done a video about it. notice here it makes a distinction between the angels, the elders, and the four living creatures being around the throne and before the throne. Right? They're like right there. They're spirits. This, though, is talking about people, nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues standing before the throne. It doesn't say they're standing around the throne, and it doesn't say the angels, the four living creatures, and the elders are with them. And there's a big difference between this great crowd and the great crowd of Revelation 19. The great crowds, actually, right? There's more than one great crowd of individuals, angels, beings, humans. So the context which I have to look at, well, what great crowd are we talking about? Well, this great crowd is described in ways that are basically the exact same descriptions given to mankind in Revelation 21. And the people that like to try to bring the great crowds of Revelation 19 to bear on this text never go to Revelation 21. I wonder why. Because they're just using great crowd, right? They're so limited and bankrupt in their understanding. They don't actually use the context and description as markers of identification. Oh, it's just some pretty general reference of great crowd. Now, there's a lot of great crowds. We need to know which one we're talking about. And there's a lot of ways we can figure that out. I've done a video. I've written about it. You can read it for yourself, of course. Okay, and then it says, Amen, the blessing, the glory, the wisdom, thanksgiving, honor, power, strength be to our God. In response, one of the elders says to me, these who are dressed in white robes, who are they and where did they come from? Right, so this elder is specifically referring to these people, right? He's not talking about the 144,000 because they're described right here, right? It describes the slaves of our God as 144,000, 12,000 out of each tribe of the sons of Israel. And then it describes a great crowd that no one can number, a numbered group and an innumerable group. And I believe, of course, the number can represent another number, as it often is the case in Revelation. So I just don't believe that there's only 144,000 that's involved here. I think this is a reference to all Christians, and the number is symbolic. So, because there's a definite number, right? Even in Revelation 6:11, it says, until the number was filled of their fellow slaves. So there's a cap here. There's a limit here. Whereas there's no limit to this group. No one can number it. It's not numberable, right? Whereas this is pretty easy to number. 144,000. Not even a million, right? It's a lot, but it's not a lot. But this group isn't numberable. That's different. And instead of being only out of the tribes of Israel, they're out of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. And they keep crying with okay. So the elder is referring to them, right? And he's saying, who are these, John? And John, he says right away, I said to him, my Lord, you're the one that knows. And he said to me, these are the ones that come out of the great tribulation. The great tribulation. Tes thlipseos tes megales. So it's a little tiny font. These come out of the great tribulation. Now remember earlier how we read in Matthew 24:21 and Matthew 24:29, it talked about that great tribulation in the context of the Jewish system of things coming to an end, right? Because it said after that great tribulation, after the tribulation of those days, all this other stuff would happen, which would include the powers of the heavens being shaken, include Christians being tested by the wild beast, and include the preaching work to all the nations. This elder says these ones in white robes, that great crowd, not the 144,000, right? We can number them. We know where they come from. They're the slaves of God. This other group, though, who are they? Right? Why is there a question about them? Why would there be a question, right? If they're just Christians, what's Why would that be so interesting? Why would that even be a question? If it should be obvious, right? But it's not obvious. There's something different about them. And that's why the elder is making this point. We know who the 144,000 are. Who are these? Who are these people? And John says, I don't know, right? And the elder tells him they come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. That is why they are before the throne of God, and they are rendering him sacred service day and night in his temple, and the one seated on the throne will spread his tent over them. They will hunger no more, nor thirst any more, neither will the sun beat down upon them, nor any scorching heat, because the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and guide them to fountains of waters of life, and God will wipe out every tear from their eyes. That is almost identical to what we read about these people right here. It says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The former heaven, the former earth passed away, sea is no more. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, and prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I heard a voice from the throne say, look, the tent of God is with mankind. He will reside with them. They will be his peoples. God himself will be with them. Mankind. It is an indisputable reference to non-spirits. In fact, it just says the temple of God is with men, right? It's a plural of anthropos, ton, anthropon. So it's clearly referring to a time, new heavens and new earth. The tent of God will be with mankind. He will wipe out every tear from their eyes, exactly like we just read. I shall be his God. He will be my peoples. Anyone conquering will inherit these things. This right here is exactly like what we just read. New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, spreading his tent over them, right? Coming down out of heaven over the earth. The tent of God is with men, mankind. He'll wipe out every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more, no mourning, nor outcry, nor pain. That's basically exactly what it says right here of the great crowd. They will hunger no more, nor thirst any more, nor sun beat down upon them. God will wipe out every tear from their eyes. And they both even talked about guiding them to fountains of waters of life, right? So this clearly appears to refer to humans. Whereas the 144,000, right? These humans here in Revelation 7 that come out of the Great Tribulation, that are described in unique and identifiable descriptions or ways in Revelation 21 with men, humans. New Jerusalem's coming down out of heaven. It's a new heavens and a new earth. And New Jerusalem's coming down out of heaven. Well, where else could it be going but to the new earth, where the men are, where there's mourning, outcry, and pain that it does away with. And the tent of God is with them. So it clearly appears to be referring to the great crowd that comes out of the Great Tribulation as humans. The mankind, the men that are referred to in the same descriptive ways in terms of what God will do for them in Revelation 21. And the 144,000, everyone, remember what we read in Revelation 14? They're not on the earth. They're not men on the earth that need to have every tear wiped out from their eyes. They're in heaven with the Lamb. He's standing on heavenly Mount Zion. They're singing with him, and their sound comes out of heaven. They're bought from among mankind, but they're in heaven, out of heaven. So the 144,000 who are sealed, right? They're on the earth because the angels are waiting for them to be sealed, But when they're with the Master, when they're with the Lamb, they're in heaven. Right? Remember, they're pillars. The one that conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Revelation chapter 3, verse 12. One that conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will by no means go out from it anymore. Well, where's the temple of his God? In heaven. But the tent of God, or the temple of God, comes out of heaven, and he's with mankind, because it elsewhere describes in Revelation chapter 22, the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. It describes the holy city. It talks about the kings of the earth bringing their glory into it. It talks about how the Lamb and God are in the city as the light of the city. Here it says the Christians are pillars in the temple. The new Jerusalem, which descends out of heaven from his God. And they won't go out from it anymore. So whether that's to be taken literal, right, and they never go on the new earth, talks about the kings of the new earth bringing their glory into New Jerusalem, where it says that the people who conquer as Christians are permanently. Okay, and going back to our text list, let's take a look at Luke 21 now. Furthermore, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by encamped armies, then know that the desolating of her is drawn near. Then let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains. We read this in the Matthew account. Let those in the midst of her withdraw. Let those in the country places not enter her, right? Clearly talking about conditions of Jerusalem in 66 to 70 CE. Because these are days for meting out justice, that all the things may be fulfilled. Woe to the pregnant woman and the one suckling a baby in those days, for there will be great necessity upon the land and wrath upon this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations. It's talking about the great tribulation of those days, the time prior to the throwing down of the stars of the heavens and the full proclamation of the good news leading to the end. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the nations until the appointed times of the nations are fulfilled. Again, as I talk about in my appointed times of the nations video, it talks about how the Jews, right? This is all in the context of Jesus' question, or the question he received, and how he had first said that the temple would be destroyed. And then he talks in his answer about all this stuff, right? Fleeing to the mountains, Jerusalem being surrounded by encamped armies. That's the Romans. All the difficulties they would have, being led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem would be trampled on until the nation's dominance over them is fulfilled, right? This is talking about the time from 70 AD forward. It's clearly talking about that, right? There's nothing in here that's talking about, for example, Daniel chapter 4, or Nebuchadnezzar, or Babylon, or Zedekiah. It's talking about the time when Jerusalem is surrounded by encamped armies, historically done by the Romans 66 to 70 CE, and how the Jews had a chance between Vespasian and Titus to flee to the mountains and not go back into Jerusalem, because these are the days of meting out justice. And then it says they will fall by the sword and be led captive. That's the captivity of 70 AD, 70 CE. From that point forward, there would be a time when the nations would trample upon Jerusalem, which we've seen historically, right? Look at all the trampling done during the Crusade periods, right? I mean, Jerusalem was constantly an object of being attacked or defended, and this nonstop bloodshed and trampling. And only in the last century did Jerusalem become a place where the Jews as a nation could really cultivate a sense of security on a high level, similar to the times in the past. Whether that means the appointed times of the nations are fulfilled, who knows, right? But what we do know is that they're not necessarily in this condition right now. They're not in a state of captivity to all the nations. And then it says, also there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth anguish of nations, not knowing the way out because of the roaring of the sea and its agitation. while men become faint out of fear, expectation of the things coming upon the inhabited earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Same reference we've been reading in all the different accounts, right? That I believe relates to the falling of the demonic spirits from heaven and the consequences that ensued for the earth. Woe for the earth and for the sea. Devils come down to you. Wild beast with horns like a lamb, speaks like a dragon, putting people under compulsion, great tribulation, persecution, enduring to the end, both in the time of the Jewish system of things and the time when the sign of the Son of Man would be apparent, which obviously wouldn't be when he was there with them. But notice what he says, as these things start to occur, raise yourselves erect. Lift your heads up. Your deliverance is getting near. Right? This is what Christians are supposed to think. We're supposed to be, right? It's going to be a tough time, but quite honestly, right, we're at a period where we're being put under compulsion and where we're pretty clearly able to see that we have similar circumstances to the wild beast trying to give us some kind of mark or putting us under compulsion to violate our relationship with the Christ and God. Right? As Christians, we're going to know that. Right? We know these texts. We know what's coming or what's said to be coming. I think we'll know what's going on when this stuff actually starts to happen. That's why he tells us, raise yourselves erect. You know what's going on. We're not unaware. We're not confused. We're not unaware of who Christ's brothers are. It's everyone who does the will of his Father, exactly like he said. Who is my mother, my brother, and my sister? The one who does the will of my Father. Christians, my brothers, my sisters. That's why it can't be Christians, as we'll see in a moment in Matthew 25, who say they don't know who his brothers are. What Christian doesn't know that? Right? There'd be no way you would be confused and not know what's going on if Christ points to you and says, you know what, you took care of my brothers, I'm going to reward you. And you're going to inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the found the earth. You don't think we would know what that is in relation to? Or that even members of the Watchtower's great crowd would know? Right? We read about it all the time. They're constantly told that's what's going to happen. So how would they not know? Why would they be confused? Right? It's not the type of question like what the elder asked John. Right? That's a rhetorical question. He's going to tell John. The people who are asking Jesus, they don't know. Right? Jesus has to tell them. So in Matthew 24, let's get into this now. We're going to discuss Matthew 24 and 25. We're getting close to the end. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me. We really need to get into the text. Right? That's what we're about. I know it takes time. I know sometimes these videos are long. I wish I could do them shorter. We have texts. Right? We have stuff we have to talk about. And I like to be thorough. I'd rather get it all in and you take it in as you can than to leave significant stuff out and have to do it all over again. Let's get it done. Matthew 24, 42. Keep on the watch, therefore, because you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. Know one thing. The householder had known in what watch the thief was coming, he would have kept awake and not allowed his house to be broken into. On this account, you too prove yourselves ready, because at an hour you do not think it to be, the Son of Man is coming. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on arriving finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. But if ever that evil slave should say in his heart, my master's delaying, should start to beat his fellow slaves, and should eat and drink with confirmed drunkards, master of that slave will come on a day he does not expect and an hour he does not know, and punish him the greatest severity and assign him his part with the hypocrites. That is where his weeping and gnashing of his teeth will be. Then the kingdom of the heavens will become like 10 virgins that took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 were foolish, 5 were discreet. Foolish took their lamps, did not take oil with them. Whereas the discreet took oil in their receptacles with their lamps. While the bridegroom was delaying, they all nodded and went to sleep. Right in the middle of the night there arose a cry, here's the bridegroom, be on your way out to meet him. Then all those virgins rose and put their lamps in order. Foolish said to the discreet, give us some of your oil because our lamps are about to go out. The discreet answered with the words, perhaps there may not be enough for us and you. Be on your way instead to those who sell it and buy for yourselves. while they were going off to buy, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins that were ready went in with him to the marriage feast. The door was shut. Afterwards, the rest of the virgins also came, saying, Sir, open to us. In answer, he said, I tell you the truth, I don't know you. Keep on the watch, therefore, because you don't know the day and the hour. Just as a man, when he's about to travel abroad, summons his slaves and committed to them his belongings. And to one he gave 5, another 2, still another 1, each one according to his own ability. And he went abroad. Immediately the one that received 5 went his way and did business, gained 5 more. Same way the one that received 2 gained 2 more. The one that received 1 just went off, dug in the ground, and hid the silver money of his master. After a long time, master of those slaves came and settled the accounts with them. So the one that had received 5 talents came forward and brought additional 5 talents, saying, Master, you gave me 5, see, gain you 5 more. Master said to him, Well done, good faithful slave. You were faithful over a few things. I will appoint you over many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Right? Isn't that basically the same thing that he was saying up here in Matthew 24:45? Who really is the faithful and discreet slave who his master appointed over his domestics? Happy is that slave if his master finds him doing so, he'll appoint him over everything. Right? And then he goes on to give examples, one of which is a group of individuals who receive a different number of talents. Right? And the first one, he got 5, he gave 5 more. He got appointed over more. Next one got 2 talents, and master, you gave me 2, I got 2 more, here's 4. Master said, well done, good faithful slave. You were faithful over a few, I'll appoint you over more. Many. Just like he was talking about before. When the master arrives and finds that you did things that you were supposed to do, that you were appointed to do, he appoints you over more. That's all this is talking about. There's really nothing else being described here, except the one who got 1 talent. Finally, the one that received 1 came forward and said, Master, I know you're exacting, reaping where you didn't sow, gathering where you didn't winnow. So I got afraid, I went off, I hid your talent. Here's what's yours. I didn't lose anything. I didn't gain anything. Take back what you gave me. I basically did nothing with what you gave me. The reply master said to him, Wicked and sluggish slave, you knew, did you, that I reaped where I didn't sow and gathered where I didn't winnow, right? So the slave is what? Assuming things on the part of the master that he's not supposed to be doing. The master gave him monetary value to go and do something with it. The slave didn't listen and blamed the master for his fear of not wanting to lose the talent. Now that's how he viewed the master. The other 2 didn't view the master that way. Went off, used the talent, got 2 more. And then he told him, he said, well, if you had that view of me, you should have given it to people that would have at least made interest, right? You didn't even think that much about me. So we're going to take away what you had, and we're going to give it to the one who actually is doing something with it. Everyone that has, more will be given. He will have an abundance. But as for him that does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. As for the good-for-nothing slave, throw him into the darkness. That is where his weeping and gnashing of teeth will be. When the Son of Man arrives in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit down on his glorious throne. Here is the parousia. Here is the part where Jesus arrives with his angels, and those who are sleeping, God brings with him. They are given a body, 1 Thessalonians 4, 1 Corinthians 15, as the first. Right? The ones who are alive don't go before those who are dead. Then those who are living and who are Christians are caught away to be with the Christ. And the nations are gathered before him. And he separates people one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Because remember, when Christ arrives, according to 1 Thessalonians 4, they're gathered together, caught away in the clouds, right? That's the first thing that happens. is those who are sleeping with God are given a new body. They're resurrected as real, complete spirit beings, spiritual body, with Christ in the heavens, caught away in the clouds. Those who are alive are caught away with him and them, and the nations are gathered before him, and he separates them. He puts the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. The king says to those on his right, "Come, you who have been blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the founding of the world. For I became hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I got thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you received me hospitably. Naked, and you clothed me. I fell sick, you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to me." This is how we're going to also help answer the question, how will Christians survive the period of time when we're put under such great compulsion that we're made to, in order to buy and sell, we need to receive the mark of the wild beast, right? How do we survive that period? If we can't buy or sell, how are we going to eat, right? Well, we know we can rely on each other. We can trust in God. But there's something else. These people. The righteous ones will answer him with the words, "Lord, when did we see you? When did we see you hungry and feed you, and or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and we receive you hospitably, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to you?" And in reply, the king will say to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." Then he will say in turn to those on the left, "Be on your way, you who have been cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. See, I told you." The lake of fire at the end, where the devil, who is also a spirit, right? Flames of fire. So there's a sense in which all the spirits of both the devil and all those who are judged as worthy of destruction can be in that lake of fire as spirits in ways we can't really contemplate, but that is appropriate for God and his own spirit, which is fire, to use in the manner in which the lake of fire is used. We just don't know. But that's what it describes them as being in, and how their destruction occurs. Right? And he goes on, he says, "I became hungry, you gave me nothing. I got thirsty, you gave me nothing. I was a stranger, you didn't receive me. Naked, you didn't clothe me. Sick and in prison, you didn't look after me." And they will answer with the words, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, stranger, naked, sick, in prison, and didn't minister to you?" Then he will answer them with the words, "Truly I say to you, the extent you did it to one of these least ones, you did it to me. And these will depart into everlasting cutting off, but the righteous into everlasting life." So, these people here don't know what's going on. The sheep or the goats don't know what's going on, right? If the sheep were Christians, everybody, well, don't Christians know this account? Wouldn't we be like, okay, I know why I'm here. I get it. I'm not confused, right? I certainly wouldn't be confused. If the Lord Jesus arrives and separates people, and I'm on the right side, I know why I'm on the right side. Right? I know the account. If I'm on the left side, I know the account. So, if I'm a Christian, right? Or if I'm me, is what I mean there. Let me clarify. Obviously, the people in these accounts don't know, because they're asking. They're saying, "Well, what are you talking? What is this? What are you talking about?" Right? As a Christian, now I'm just saying whether I'm judged as I'm being, I'm not here to speak too boldly for myself. So what I'm saying is, me, Greg Stafford, if I'm on the right or on the left in the future, I know why I'm there. These people don't. He's telling them, because you did or you didn't support my brothers, the Christians, women and men, right? There's no gender separating us between Christ. There is in reality, right? But as Christians, we're all one and we're all the same. There's a structure, right? Head of the Christ, man as woman. Man, woman is man, but still, that's not meant to. It's just a structure that is based on God's arrangement. We're all basically the same in the eyes of God, right? We're not really better or worse as human beings in that sense. It's our heart, it's what we do, it's our faith. These people, though, they're accepted based on the way they treat others. They're not given life because of their faith. Right? This is kind of a temporary acceptance for the way they treated Christians during this period of intense persecution, right? And remember, I said earlier I would help answer the question, how are we going to survive if we can't buy food or anything without the mark of the wild beast, right? Well, we have Christians we can rely on in part, but they're all going to be persecuted too. So at some point, we're going to be under pressure. These people help us get through. Some of us. We're in these conditions, right? He says, when all my brothers were in these conditions, you were helping me by helping them. Right? So that would have to be the Christians, because we represent the Christ. The people that are helping Christ's brothers aren't Christians. They're not given life because of faith in Christ. They don't even know they're helping his brothers. They're given life in the new earth because of the way they treat the Christians. They're washing their robes and making them white. But they haven't done that yet, or they would already know this stuff. So they get tested, remember, right? That's why the number of people that fall away or that are destroyed when Satan is let out at the end of 1,000 years is the sand of the sea. Right? These people are allowed to come into the new earth because of what they did for Christ's brothers. It's their reward. They're the ones alive. Right? Remember the elder that questions John. These come out of the great tribulation. They make it through. Right here. They're making it through. The Son of Man has arrived. All the angels are with him. Those dead in union with Christ have risen first. Those who are alive at the coming of Christ's presence are caught away to be with him. The nations are gathered before him. They're separated. And they're judged not because of their faith. They're judged because of the way they treated his brothers. That's it. And then remember, those who are part of the first resurrection aren't subject to the second death. Christians, once we're resurrected or once we're caught away and sealed, that's it. These people can die. That's what it talks about in Revelation, that they're the nations that come into the new earth, and that many of whom fall away when the devil is released, but many don't, right? So we're going to read more about it in just a moment. But that's the only way this makes sense, because it can't be Christians that don't know what's going on, and the Christians that are resurrected and caught away to be with the Christ are the 144,000 who are on heavenly Mount Zion, whose singing comes out of heaven, who are in New Jerusalem as pillars and may come down to the earth in New Jerusalem, right? But they're with the Christ in heaven. They're not on the earth being cured by the leaves of the nations. They're already 100%, right? They've been resurrected, caught away to be with the Christ, staying on the heavenly Mount Zion. And they're ruling with him for the 1,000 years over the nations who have just been approved based on their treatment of the Christians at the judgment after the Great Tribulation. Okay, so we already read this part where it talks about the parallels with the great crowd, in Revelation 7. So let's skip that and go to Revelation 21, 23. We're almost done, everyone. And the city has no need of the sun nor of the moon to shine upon it, for the glory of God lighted it up. And its lamp was the Lamb. And the nations walk by means of its light. And the kings of the earth bring their glory into it. It's talking about the holy city, New Jerusalem, that comes down out of heaven. In fact, if we go real quickly to Revelation 21:23 in the NWT. Just a couple of those missing texts. 21. Right here, verse 10. So he carried me away in the power of the Spirit to a great and lofty mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And then it describes the city, right? And then here's where it picks up on the verse where we're reading right here. Excuse me. And it talks about the nations walking by means of New Jerusalem's light, and the kings of the earth bringing their glory into it. Excuse me. Apologize, everyone. Just had to blow my nose. So we have clearly a difference between New Jerusalem and the Christians who are permanent pillars in it, and the nations, the kings of the earth who bring their glory into it. It says the gates will not be closed at all by day, for night will not exist there. And they will bring the glory and honor of the nations into it, right? It doesn't actually talk about, for example, the apostles coming out onto the new earth, right? They're in New Jerusalem. They're in this perfect city as permanent pillars. Why would they want to leave there? And it says they don't leave there. And they don't have to, right? The nations bring their glory and honor into it. Anything not sacred and anyone that carries on a disgusting thing and a lie will in no way enter into it, right? Because why is that even being talked about? Why does it even talk about nothing sacred or a disgusting thing or a lie being brought into New Jerusalem? Enter into it. Because it's the nations, right? It's the nations who are still being cured and who have to undergo the final test by Satan coming to mislead them. Not talking about the Christians being misled at the end of 1,000 years. It's talking about the nations. Only those in the Lamb's scroll of life will. And he showed me a river of water of life, clear as crystal, flowing out from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And down the middle of its Broadway, on this side of the river and on that side, there were trees of life producing 12 crops of fruit, yielding their fruits each month. And the leaves of the trees were for the curing of the nations. The nations that are brought before Jesus in Matthew 25, that are put on his right and approved to inherit the kingdom prepared by God from the founding of the earth, right? The way the earth was made. They're the nations that enter the new earth, over whom New Jerusalem and the Christians and the Lamb that are in it shine God's light. And there will no more be any curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his slaves will render him sacred service. And they will see his face, and his name will be on their forehead. Who are his slaves? 140, the Christians, right? Also, night will be no more, and they will have no need for lamplight, nor do they have sunlight, because Jehovah God, or the Lord God, will shed light upon them, and they will rule as kings forever and ever, right? And of course, this could also be the nations that are cured, right? I'm not saying that those wouldn't be considered slaves, rendering him sacred service. And remember, they are kings upon the earth. Kings of the earth bring their glory into New Jerusalem, where the Christians and the Christ are ruling as kings and priests. And then this is a text we read earlier. To the one that conquers, I'll make him a pillar in the temple of my God. He will not go out from it anymore. Write upon him the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which descends out of heaven from my God, and that new name of mine, which I believe is the word of God. And of course, if the name of God is going to be written on us, then they must know what that name is, right? And we all know what that name is. It's Yahweh. Maybe with the final aspirant, Yahweh. Certainly, Yah or Jah in its anglicized form. So I'm hopeful that this discussion was helpful. We talked a lot about different texts that speak of tribulation, the great tribulation, some of the signs of Jesus' presence, signs of the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem in the first century. And I think we were able to put it in a sensible context every time so that it all fit together. And even though at times the Bible sometimes compresses narratives or expands upon them in ways where it's hard to find out exactly how much time it may be taking for some of these events to occur, right? Like the battle in heaven that we talked about. That's why it's important for us not to try to put together a timeline so that we can then try to figure all this out. All we really need to know are the descriptions, right? A great tribulation is coming, during which time Christians will be put under persecution, compulsion to receive a mark for a dragon-like lamb, an antichrist, in my opinion, that would put us at odds with the Christ. So we have to resist that pressure. We will know what it is. We have the texts. We won't be caught unaware. That day will not overtake us as it does those who are asleep or thieves. We're prepared. If we have faith, if we believe in God, we trust in the Messiah, and we treat each other the way we want to be treated, if we grow together now, we can be there for each other when it gets tough. And even if it gets so tough that we don't have any other Christians there around us, according to the Bible, there will be those who are favorably disposed to help us to get through what will, without question, be, if not the greatest tribulation of all time, then certainly a great tribulation.